Hello, everyone. We are live for our Friday night Facebook Live discussing tenant screening tips and talking about my new endeavors that I've have taken on that I'm excited to finally be able to share with everyone because it's been a passion of mine to really discuss ways for us to create a fair and balanced housing system. As everyone has noticed, I've been very much of an advocate throughout the couple of years, almost 12 to be exact. So we are definitely working our butts off, just trying to bring that small landlord voice to our elected officials, explaining to them why small landlords, or big landlords for that matter, are such an important part of creating affordable housing. As you can see right now through different articles that are happening all over the web, it's that there is a housing crisis. And normally what happens through a housing crisis is that they start to put more restrictions. And now that an election is coming, they're definitely going to be looking at ways to change the industry. And we're just hoping that they don't put on more restrictions that are obviously going to affect the way that landlords invest. And so this is why it's nice to communicate with the members within Ontario Landlords Watch Facebook group, as well as our YouTube channel, in order to kind of let you know it's okay to speak up. You got to speak up, you got to speak loud, you got to tell them, the elected officials and even media, what's going on in our industry so that we can have our voices heard instead of just waiting for a news anchor to say, hey, can you do an interview with us? So we like to really do these Facebook Lives very frequently to not only get our voices out there regarding advocacy and what the issues are within Ontario, but we also like to educate. So tonight I have Nelda Schulte. She is from Alberta. So even though we have people from Alberta, tenant screening is always going to be the same. There's going to be different tricks, different ways of making sure that we're getting good tenants. Even with the landlord and tenant board the way it is, yes, it's very skewed towards protecting tenants, but if we do a good job on doing our tenant screening, there's going to be a lot of problems and a lot of headaches that we can avoid by just bringing the right people to the team and letting them know what you can do as a landlord, especially if you're doing it yourself, or if you're a property manager looking to, make sure you're getting a good client, a good tenant for your client. There's lots of different ways that landlords are going to learn. And, we were able to learn through landlords' mistakes, different things such as accepting a fake credit check, so we're going to talk about a little bit about that just to get you guys prepared with the spring and the summer season happening. We're going to see a lot of turnover. That tends to be the case in the spring and the summer. People want to relocate. So getting our landlords educated on what they can do and pointers. And while we're talking with Nelda back and forth regarding her tenant screening tips, put your tips, because I'm sure we only have 14 that we're going to share with you tonight, but I'm sure there's a lot more because tenant screening tips are absolutely vital in our industry. And I really hope that we can share that information with each other and not share all of it. Obviously, we're all on Facebook Live, and we don't want our professional tenants to know what they have to do in order to try to get over our obstacles of what we are. But we'll educate you on that as well. And then after we're done talking about tenant screening, I'm going to be able to share with you what's next, what I have planned and what I'm a part of and what I want to bring to you. And hopefully you can support, as well as just bringing you different products, different services, and the needs for you as a landlord in Ontario. So please let me welcome Nelda. Hello, Nelda.
Hi, Kayla.
Thank you so much for doing this with me tonight.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm always happy
to talk about
I'm always happy to talk about tenant screening tips.
Well, first, I want to congratulate you on this article, which I'm going to push a link in here right now so people can follow along with this article that was published on Front Lobby's page. So everyone can kind of see what we're going to be talking about tonight, so that everyone is able to follow along with us, because there's going to be lots of different things that we need to do right down from our ad. We have our ad that we post, and some landlords, they put in what they want as a tenant. And for me, it's more like, don't put what you're looking for as a tenant. Look at what your unit has to offer, that good tenant that you're trying to attract to your type of unit.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you also have to be very careful about what you say in your ad.
Oh,
yes. So that we all do, so that we're not violating human rights. We're not using exclusive language. More on that later.
And you know what? Bringing in the advocacy, like I think our government, they every time I'm speaking with them, I'm like, you are giving a unit that's worth thousands and thousands of dollars to one
Yep.
person, and with the economy, everything's being tough. We need to make sure that we're getting good people because right now we're seeing because of that eviction ban, we're seeing a lot of landlords kind of leaving the industry because they're like, okay, like things are getting crazy. We don't know what's happening with the economy, with the wars that's happening, do we get out now, right? But it's still a safe, it's still secure. We just need to make sure that you're getting the right type of tenant into your unit. And the way you do that is making sure that you're following that proper protocol. Now, after you get yourself a credit check, everyone, like before, I'm guilty. I was trusting my gut for many, many years.
I did too.
Right. We're just like, yeah, I like you. Here you go. Here's the place, right? Like you got it. Make sure the rent's on time. But sometimes, just like credit is now such a very deep part of everything that like we have to have good credit to buy a home. Everyone needs to start knowing that their credit is very important if they want to rent it.
Yeah, and most adults do understand that. Most adults understand that you do have to run a credit check. But as landlords, we have to get permission to run a credit check if we're doing it ourselves, which I highly recommend we do. I've had numerous people tell me, oh, well, I'll just give you my credit check from, that I got a year ago, or I just pulled, there are those instant credit check things that you can pull up. I can't even remember the name of them right now.
Like the
Credit
just
Karma.
like
Credit Karma.
yeah.
Those ones. So a couple of years ago, I wrote an article comparing those ones to Equifax and TransUnion, and they're really not the same. And you really shouldn't trust somebody else's credit check. You should only trust your own credit check because it's too easy to fake them. You can fake credit checks quite easily.
Oh, we had Mackenzie Wilson from Alberta. He did it right in front of us. Like he's like, there you go. This is how you can get a fake one, right? So it's really important. That's why I definitely became the ambassador of Front Lobby and Landlord Credit Bureau, so we can get that access to our clients, or to our landlords to know where they can do a credit card. Because if you think as a new landlord, you're like, okay, I need to do a credit check. Who are you going to think of right away? Equifax or TransUnion? And then you're like, you call Equifax and you call TransUnion. They're like, sorry, you don't have a high volume of people that you do, right? So definitely bringing that to our landlord's attention is obviously good. Now, before we get into everything, because we're jumping right in, because Nelda is like a wealth of knowledge, guys, and I've been talking to her for quite some time. Her articles are fantastic. Please give her a follow on Facebook as well as her Twitter account. She's very knowledgeable on the industry in itself, and definitely for our landlords looking to want to invest in Alberta, she's going to be a girl to connect with. So definitely follow her there. But how did you get into it? Like, give us a little bit of background about you, Nelda.
Well, I always wanted to own my own property, but my first career was as a musician and a music teacher, and I wasn't really making very much money. So I honestly didn't know how that was going to happen. I didn't really believe that I would ever be able to own a property. But I started attending investment seminars for housing, and I went to one where they were talking about house hacking, and then bing, a light bulb kind of went off in my brain. I thought, oh, okay, that's how I can do it. I can buy a house, I can rent out the suite, or I can rent out rooms, and that's how I can make it work. That's how it can all work out for me. Anyway, long story short, a couple of years later, I got a job in Fort McMurray, and I bought my first property, and I house hacked. So I had a suite in the basement, and I also rented rooms upstairs. But what happened there was, once I got it, and I thought, phew, I'm set. I got the house, I got the mortgage, done. I'll just get some tenants in there, and I'm good to go. And putting good tenants in your property and screening them is a whole other kettle of fish than buying a property. The investment part, the buying part, that's the pretty shiny part. And then there's the managing the tenants, and then there's the maintenance part. So there's kind of three components that you're kind of juggling at any given time. So that's how I got into it. I got into it by house hacking. So I lived on the upstairs suite in one of the bedrooms. I rented the other two bedrooms across the hallway from me. And this is from someone who's never had roommates. Here I was, like 38 years old, buying a house for the first time, living with roommates for the first time, and having a suite in the basement with other roommates. And they were all tradespeople. Everybody was in the trades. So I lived with a whole house full of men. So that's how I got started. And of course, made a ton of mistakes. Had a very scary mistake with a couple of guys who were living downstairs who, again, I didn't run a credit check. I didn't know how to run a credit check. I didn't know where to run a credit check. I remember calling my real estate agent who sold me the house and said, if I want to run a credit check, how do I do it? And she didn't really know because the banks always did it first. So I called the bank and they said, well, we run it through our system. So, they didn't know. So I just didn't do one.
Yeah.
And then I ended up with, a drug problem in the basement. Well, I was living upstairs and tried to figure out how to get rid of them and did get rid of them. But I thought, that's it. I'm never going to make that mistake ever again. I've got to figure out what I'm doing here. And that's when I started developing the tenant screening process.
And that's the thing. And you get the credit check, right? Let's say it's all good and it's all dandy, but we can't just look at that. And I know a lot of our landlords, like I talk to landlords all the time and they go, well, they gave me a credit check. The credit check was good. It's because they have that good credit. You need to see their payment history. You need to pay attention to those trade lines to see how much debt is actually available to these type of tenants and the type of tenants of who they are. Now, when you're looking at the type of rental unit that you have and what landlords are afraid of on most cases is that now that they're your tenant, they had that good credit, they're giving you their work reference and the other landlord reference, and trying to figure out if they are the landlord or if they're not the landlord. And the way to kind of do that as well, when you're calling those potential landlords, it's like, what can I do to ask about this tenant so that they can give me information, but also interview that in particular person to make sure that they are the landlord. So you start bringing up the industry, you start bringing up the landlord and tenant board and see if it's a lingo that they're communicating with, or if they're just really trying to be shy and they're not really talkative on the phone. They're very, very short, very snippish, and they're not trying to engage with you, almost like little red flags. Because you got to think that if you have a bad tenant, a lot of our landlords out there are so desperate to get rid of a bad tenant that they're like, I'm just going to say whatever I can get them out of my house. I just had enough. Right. And that's landlord code 101. Don't give a reference for a bad tenants, guys.
Yeah, but I think they're basically two kinds of landlords. So there are people who own enough properties that they have a property manager managing their properties. So if somebody lists a property management company as their landlord, that's pretty easy to find. So you can go online, you can do a search and see if that property management company exists, and then you can call their phone number and ask for that person who's on the application form listed as the property management company representative. And they're used to answering calls and screening, and they do this every day, and they have to give you information. It's standard information. They have to follow the FOIP guidelines and human rights, but they'll tell you if they paid the rent on time every month. They'll tell you if there've been any problems, and those ones are easy to find. That's pretty cut and dry. So that part, if it's a property management company, it's easy peasy. If it's an individual landlord like me, for instance, I no longer have a property management company. I self-manage my own properties, and so I'm an individual landlord. So if somebody just called me, how would they know I'm not a landlord or their best friend lying on the couch smoking a reefer? Like that's. So how do you get past that? So I've got sort of two tricks that I use for that. One of them is I pretend that I'm a tenant who's looking for a place to live. By the way, I always Google search everyone on the application form. So I Google search the landlord's names on the application and I cross-reference them with everything I find. So their LinkedIn profiles, everything else, to see if they look like the kind of person who'd own a property, or if there's any evidence in their LinkedIn profile or other profiles of them owning a property and renting. And you can usually find some kind of evidence. If you don't, and you call them, then I can say, I'm a tenant, and I heard that you've got a 1-bedroom condo for rent, if that's
nice.
listed.
I love that one. You just taught me something.
Yeah. And so then sometimes they'll go like, well, no, I don't have properties. I don't have a property for rent. Why are you calling me? Like, well, who are you? And it busted because that's their friend or whoever, right?
Private name, guys. Block out your number when you're calling.
So that's one way you can check. The other way that we checked, which made people think we were really anal, was that I would run title searches. So in Alberta, you can run a title search through SPIN2, SPIN2, number 2.
Yep.
And you can see if the name on the title matches the landlord's name. And most of the time it does for individual landlords. As we know, titles can change and shift. You can have different people on the title, or you can give it to somebody else, or it's not, or maybe the person changed their last name because they got married or divorced and they changed it back. So name isn't always 100%, but a lot of times it is. So a title search is another good way to do it. So Google can be your best friend. Run social media searches on them and see what you can find, and you can usually find stuff on people. And then pretend that you're a tenant when you're looking for a place to live. Use a different phone number, change your voice. You can have a little fun with that one. And then lastly, you can run a title search. And so those things will help you validate whether or not that landlord is an actual landlord or not just their friend.
And lining, like when they give you their current address on their application, when you're doing the credit check as well, you're going to be able to take that address that they put on the application and line it up with what address is showing up on their credit check, their credit report, right? So that's something that you're like, oh, well, why were you here? And this is, you haven't updated your driver's license. Like, don't you have like 30, 60 days, in order to do this? Like, what's going on here? Like, this, how organized are you, right? So definitely lining up the address, where they lived. It's definitely an indicator that, you catch them in one lie, how many other lies are on that application?
Exactly. So cross-reference your information. Excellent. Yeah, of course, definitely do that. That's great that you mentioned that. I forgot to put it in. Definitely cross-reference.
Oh, yeah. we're just going back and forth between me and you. Or I said I said we could write a book, but you kind of beat me to the punch. Sorry,
I didn't write
I didn't let the secret out, did I? Everyone's got to read it. So now that
I'm glad you did.
Say that again.
You let it out, but I'm glad you did.
It's, guys, I got the first peeksy. I love it. And it's enabled to work with a lot of landlords. There's not a lot of support. There's not a lot of education. And when you go into, this landlord world, don't wait for a problem to come up before you get your education on how to deal with that problem. We have to be more proactive in getting that in education on A, from tenant screening, to B, this is what happened with the tenant. And this is where we're going to go into other videos just regarding, like, this is a situation, how would you deal with this? And how would you deal with it before you go to the landlord and tenant board, or this is the way you're going to deal with it at the landlord and tenant board, and this is what you can do after, right? So it's lots of education is needed. If you're in this industry, don't let it scare you. You just need to be well informed on it. So now that we get our tenant and you're checking them out, this is them coming into the unit now, because really with COVID we got into pre-screening, right? And I think that was a lot of making sure that we're not wasting our time with tire kickers or people who are just going to do no shows. And we almost wanted to see who's going to be very serious about the rental application. So you start to ask them pre-screening questions right off the get-go in order to know, are you serious about applying to my rental unit? Now, when you're a landlord, obviously so many landlords are totally cool on pets, especially in Ontario. You could be okay with pets. At the same time, if they say, no, I don't have a pet, and they move in the pet, unless that pet is starting to be a nuisance for others or starting to cause damage, there's really nothing you can do about it, right? So we really need to get ourselves into, trying to figure out and see, are these tenants are very trustworthy on, talking to us about what kind of pets. So how would you bring up these pre-screening questions to these potential tenants in order to find out if they have that pet that you may or may not want?
Right. So firstly, well, and you just mentioned this, you want to pre-screen so you're not wasting your time, and so that you're not getting the wrong tenant. So obviously, if you've got a 1-bedroom condo and a family of 10 with 4 dogs contact you, that's not going to work. You don't want to waste your time going down to do a showing for them. So yeah, that's what these pre-screening questions are for. Pets. I usually ask, how many pets do you have? And if so, or not if so, but what breed and weight are they? And the reason I ask how many pets do you have rather than do you have any pets is because a lot of people don't really consider their pets. They consider them a family member. Oftentimes people say, well, I don't consider that, that's not a dog. That's my son. Or that's my, like a sister to me.
Have to be a little bit more detail on that there.
Yeah. Okay. So that's how they view them. Or you might have people who are pet sitting for their family members, their friends, or whatever. And so even though they don't own a pet, they still live with pets. Or I've had couples who split up, but they end up with sort of like joint ownership of the pets. And so even though they say they don't own a pet, there's a pet staying with them a couple times. So if you say how many pets and what breed and weight are they, you're more apt to get an honest answer than if you say, do you have any pets? So that's why I always ask that. And then people do spill. They will tell you stuff. They'll tell you, oh, well, I don't really have a pet, but I cat sit my my neighbor's 3 Siamese cats and their dog, twice a month, or they'll tell you stuff like that. So that's good to know. You can also run another social media check and take a look at their Facebook profile, because people love to post pictures of themselves with their pets. So
Yeah.
that's to verify if they actually do have pets. So that's the first question to ask is, how many pets do you have, and what breed and weight are they?
And that's what I've been, go ahead.
I was just going to say that service animals, as I'm sure your readers know, it's just a good reminder, service animals are not considered pets. That falls under the human rights grounds. They're considered companions, service companions, and so you can't refuse a tenant a lease on the basis of having a service animal. So a service animal is not a pet. So just wanted to clarify that.
And that's the one thing when I'm doing my screening, it's about kind of making them feel that I'm open to it. If I to say that I have a pet, here's Fluffy, he's a picture on my phone that I just snapped before while I was waiting for them to show up, just to see if they're able to. And it's sad that we have to do this, that we have to act, that we have to pretend, and we have to be actors, but you have to know that you have everything at stake as an investor. So it's not our fault, it's the government, the way that the process is, everything that's happening. We have to make sure that we're doing, and it's not just for the simple fact that I don't want to pet in this home, it's smelly, whatever. It's like you have other tenants, and then other people have allergies to this pet, and there is damage that could happen of it, and there's more liability. Well, what happens if that pet decides to bite another tenant, and then if you do get a pet in there, now you have to be prepared for how to address that in particular situation when the dog is barking or there's dog feces on the grass that the tenants won't pick up. There's more problems to it, and I think that's what landlords are trying to do, is to stay away from those type of problems. So that's why they're going to get very, very picky now when it comes down to tenants. Now, for the next time of getting into your unit, it's a 2-bedroom. Obviously, everyone has bylaws that they have to follow within their city. What kind of questions would you like to put out there to limit the amount of people that are going to move into the place, especially when utilities are included? We just want to know. We just need to know to price the unit accordingly. How would you push that out?
Yeah. So then I would ask, is this rental unit for you and you only, or are there other occupants who are going to be living with you? And how many other occupants will be sharing your property with you? And I've never ever gotten a number. It's kind of funny because people will never say, 5 or 3 or 2 or anything like that. They'll say, my mother-in-law stays with us sometimes, and my husband has 2 kids from his first marriage and 1 kid from his second marriage, and they're coming here occasional weekends, and I've got my 4 kids. So I start putting little ticks beside the papers so that I can see how many people are actually talking about. And then I'll look at it and I'll say, okay, so you've got 11 people. It's a 2-bedroom condo. I'm not quite sure these fit the minimum housing and health standards. And sorry, the condo does not allow pets. We've got a strict policy on that. So your 3 short dogs won't really work here. So you ask the how many question, ask an open-ended question, and then you'll get a more honest response, because they'll start listing all these people off.
And it's definitely acting very casual, not as an interview. You're not going to sit them down, and you just have to talk on the phone with them if it's a pre-screening, or you can utilize these pre-screening questions through the actual screening. Because once you have the concept of knowing how many people, because you need to make sure you're following the bylaw and it's not overcrowding, and the utilities are priced the way it is. But again, for Ontario, as long as it's not overcrowding and it's not breaking any bylaws, they can move in whoever they want, and there's nothing landlords can do about it, right? So that's where, unless they start causing trouble, then you might be able to do something. Now, when you get into asking tenants, that they want to move in, and they want to move in all these people, what would you say about the move-in date? Because I know that in a question of asking them when they want to move, that's a very good question to ask, because you want to know, are they looking in a week? Are they looking in 60 days? What's going on there? What's your thought process?
And I think you've asked it already. You said, what date would you like to move in? So just a very direct question, what date do you want to move in? And if they say, well, tomorrow or today, and you say, well, the property is only available on such and such a date, are you able to wait that long? And they'll either say yes or no. So, just a very direct question, very simple question. What date do you want to move in?
What would you say is a red flag? What would be a red flag for you?
this has happened a number of times. People will say they want to move in right now, and they're going to show up with cash. That is a huge red flag.
Or the one that they said that they're very handy and they can help you fix things.
Yeah, and they might be. I mean, I don't know, but you don't want. Do you really want somebody you've never met before? You know, you have no idea what they can or they can't do. Free hand to do whatever they want to your property. No, I wouldn't. I'd rather bring in my own people that are screened and they've got WCB and I know what they're capable of doing. But yeah, usually the big red flag is they want to move in right away, like right now. And they frequently people in this category say they want to bring cash. They'll pay for a year upfront with cash. They try and entice me with cash. That's usually the big red flag. Now, and just to go back a little bit, when I lived in Fort McMurray during the boom, people paid in cash all the time. And they did want to move in right away because they had just gotten a contract. Maybe they just got off site and finished their health and safety stuff and they needed a place to live immediately. So that was not at all uncommon there. But here, that is not common and that is a red flag. So if someone's waving money under your nose,
you're like, no, I like to keep everything on the books, please. We're running a legit service here.
Yeah, and if they want to move in right now, that's either they got kicked out of their last place, they couch surfing, they don't have a place to live. There are a lot of people who kind of live under the radar. You know, I'm always kind of surprised how many people have not had a fixed address for years. And so those people frequently want to move in right away. And then we have people who have no source of real income. They show up with dogs, a posse of people. They want to move in right away too. They want to pay cash, drive fancy cars, flashy jewelry. This is a huge, huge, huge red flag.
Now, when we're doing our pre-screening, you know what you're looking for as a tenant. Now you're going to know what your tenancy looks like. Like Alberta, you guys have my heart up there. I wish Ontario elected officials had followed a lot of what you guys have. We have to kill a tree every time we have to evict someone. So let's say we're very, very we have to be very on top of our tenant screening. And when you look at long-term versus short-term rentals and, you know, people getting into just that vacation setting, because with the short terms, if it's under that 28-day mark, you know, they're not underneath the Residential and Tenancy Act. And that was starting to be that going trend before COVID. Everyone started getting into the short-term rentals. They're like, I don't got to deal with the RTA. I can just do short-term, rent to professionals working in that city. You know, this is great. And then of course, COVID hit and things went a little sour. But again, your point when you talk about the pre-screening questions, how do you bring up how long they plan to stay there? And what flags would you
just ask them what's the length of the tenancy that you want, or what's the length of a lease that you want. Are you looking for 6 months, 3 months, a year, 3 years? And people will tell you. It's always a good idea to write it in your ad as well, that you are looking for whatever your tenancy requirements are. Although people don't always read it, so that you think you've made it very clear, you put it on the top and in the middle, and once again on the bottom, and maybe a reminder as a PS. And you know, that's happened to me a number of times where I'm looking for long-term renters, and a person who calls me says, well, I can only stay for 3 months. So yeah, that's a very important question to ask. How long of a lease are you looking for? How long are you planning on living in this property?
Now, I have the link for this article that's on Front Lobby's page that everyone can follow along now for your number 5 tip. So that would be,
why are you moving? I got a really interesting response from this one potential tenant about a year ago. And he said, oh, you know, the landlords that I deal with here are just horrible, and I'm sued my last 3. I thought, okay, we're not sure.
What did you just say?
Information. Yeah, or sometimes, you know, people don't very often filter what they say. They just kind of come right up and say it. So especially
you're making them feel comfortable. That's good.
I was going to say, especially if, you know, you get very interested in what they have to say, like Kayla says, you just like you're acting like you're having a friendly conversation. You're really interested in finding out about them, and then they get very, very free with what they tell you. And that why are you moving is a very telling answer. Or if they're talking about, you know, how they're with a boyfriend or whatever, and, you know, they stiffed him with the rent, or, you know, all these last 3 people were horrible roommates, and, you know, they were awful people. There's nothing wrong with them. It's everybody else. You know, you can get a feel for who you're dealing with. So, and you can find ways to have them move along.
I've had that too. It's like, oh, why are you moving? It's like, well, I was evicted. I'm like, oh no. All right. Where are you going? And it's to the point where like we have to ask these type of questions because one, it's like, are you moving into the city? Are you new into the city? Are you moving for work? Are you planning to stay here for a while? Did you get evicted? You know, they can really tell what type of tenant you're looking for, you know, and you got to work this tenant relationship as, you know, it's a business relationship, right? And I think we need to know that we can work with this type of tenant if something did go wrong, that, you know, we're picking that right type of tenant. We just need to know a little bit more about them. And you know what? If we're stepping up our tenant screening, guess what? All we're going to do is make sure our tenants who are out there knowing how bad our system is in Ontario is that they're stopping doing what they're doing. That is really ruining it for good landlords and good tenants, right? So we want them to share that, you know, landlords are stepping up their screening and they've stepped it up definitely on a whole new level since COVID. So we really do need to make sure that we share this type of information on how to bring it across, because just that one question of why you're moving, it can definitely give you a whole different vision of that in particular tenant.
Yeah,
Just
thankfully
like
we now have landlord lobby. We have tenant queue. You can track people's payments and they're attached to the credit rating, whereas you couldn't do that before. You know, so people could stiff any number of landlords that never showed up on their credit rating, whereas you can report people through the credit bureau and it shows up.
When Bill 184 came out in Ontario, seeing that there was more punishment to landlords who were done unlawful evictions, trying to keep a record of how many landlords have issued N12 and 13, which is taking it over for their own personal use or renovations. They want to keep track of that, but they don't want to keep track of people who are able to abuse landlord after landlord. So after Bill 184, I went digging. I said, there's got to be like someone outside of Canada, someone who we can report our tenants to. And then I found Landlord Credit Bureau, in which they have now had a rebrand of like a sister of Front Lobby, where landlords are getting those credit checks and they're able to report their tenants' monthly payment history for the good and the delinquency. So landlords now, when you're checking these credit checks, don't just look at the score. We got to look in our trade line. And yes, the trade line, what's in the trade line will affect that score, but we do have to get ourselves into the trade lines and seeing what kind of debt is available. And you're getting to see what that total debt is. And once you start to be able to share the concept of your rent payments, because when you get your credit checks through Front Lobby, and you're reporting these rent payments, one, when you're doing your credit check, you're not only going to get the credit score, you're going to be able to get the tenancy records. So if you did have a landlord who did report to Front Lobby, it's not just going to Landlord Credit Bureau, it's also going over to Equifax. So this is very important. It's almost normal now in the States for rent reporting. I believe there's one state that make it mandatory for rent reporting. So it's the new wave. I call it the game changer. And that's why every landlord needs to do it, for the simple fact that we're all communicating. We're all united within the system now in order to do our rent reporting. And it's an expense. It's an expense for your business. So this is why when you're doing screening.
Yeah, I love the way it works, because they're good people who, you know, I've got some tenants who, you know, were both divorced and their spouses wrecked the credit rating, and one of them managed to sort of inch hers up a little bit. She's an excellent tenant, and she pays early every month, but her credit rating with just regular credit isn't going up. But I've now got her in landlord lobby, so her credit rating should start.
Front Lobby. You're like, I'm like, I like the name of that.
Front Lobby. I've got her in Front Lobby, and hopefully that'll help her out, because she deserves to be, you know, the good people deserve to be rewarded and the bad people deserve to be reported, and they should have to pay the piper. I've been stiffed before on that. That's, you know, I don't know why. That's a kind of a rat. There's I guess sort of a bias against landlords, where the bias is that we're all these really wealthy people who just, you know, are out to stiff people, and we're not. You know, we're people trying to earn a living, and all these things cost us money. We had to earn our houses. We had to earn everything that went into that house. We have to earn all the maintenance. You know, we can't give that away for free. We're trying to run a business, you know. So there isn't quite a shift yet in the thinking with the legislation, but now there's a bit of a shift on what the landlords can do, where we can report stuff and we can help each other out. So yeah, let's keep posting our tenant reports on Front Lobby, and
yeah, a lot of our landlords, if they had a bad tenant, they would put it in Facebook groups. Like, obviously not everyone's on Facebook, we really want to make sure.
Yeah.
And we have to get that communication out there, because we do. And I think we don't really give our good tenants credit, right? For the ones who have been paying on time, keeping their places like a dollhouse, try not to be very vindictive if something goes wrong. They're very understanding to understand that it's a maintenance issue. Landlords are able to deal with it, and utilizing this tool, not only for negotiations between, hey, I have a rental unit, and, by being in my rental unit, I'm going to help you build your credit history. It's going to attract the right type of tenants to you. So putting that into your rental ad is going to be very important, in order to inform potential tenants that this is another feature to your unit. And also, it's going to defer people who are almost like those tire kickers, like, hey, do you do credit checks? Yeah. Okay, I'll let you know if I'm going to apply or not, right? And that's the concept that you do when you just start utilizing this name inside of your rental ad. And when you're meeting with them in person, informing them again that you do rent reporting. And then the good ones are going to like, oh, I can get a better score, I can set myself up to qualify for a mortgage. Let's go, let's do this. And then the ones that are not going to be so fancy about it, because they're obviously going to be hit to the bureau monthly, they're obviously not going to want to be filling out that application. So another great tip that we need to be utilizing when it comes down to letting these tenants know, and that in itself is a perfect way for us to protect ourselves through this tenant screening process. Even for my tenants now, they're like, hey, my money didn't come out of the account, like, what happened? I'm like, calm down, it's a holiday, this is why you didn't see it out on the first. And they're like, oh, okay, I didn't want to be reported as late. I'm like,
yay, working.
So I think we already talked about your number 6, which is the credit checks. We talked about right in the beginning, because I think that is a very good thing. We should have had that as number 1, just because we have to make sure our landlords are doing their credit checks. Form checks.
Credit checks show you so much. Like you said, you can verify their address, their identity, their place of employment. You can see if they're telling you the truth about where they've lived. It shows how much money they're making every month. Well, not always, but it shows you liens, collections, loans. So you can get a really good snapshot of where they're at, and you get a really good snapshot of whether they pay their bills on time. So that's what's most important. So usually I run the credit check first, and then I do all the other stuff. I do the landlord references and the work references.
And our good tenants can jump into this. They can sign up for their tenant account and invite their landlord. So as a tenant, as you're asking them for their work references, next question, you can ask them, do you have a tenancy record with Landlord Credit Bureau? And this is going to be a way of like, no. I was like, well, for other tenants who are out there who are planning to relocate, it's a good idea to start getting your landlord now to start reporting on your behalf underneath your account, in order to start having that as a perfect tool. So when landlords are asking for all these different type of documentations, you're now coming with a little extra to show that you have what it takes to be a good tenant. And it's something that I think we don't do a lot of, is talking about how good tenants can show that they're going to be good tenants, right? So I think that would be great on how do you ask your potential tenants that about their income. That's the number 1 sore spot. What's your income? Can you afford this place? But at the same time, you don't want to say, can you afford this place?
No, you can't really ask that question, but you can ask for proof of employment. So it's sort of a catch-22. So if you're getting proof of employment and you're getting a recent pay stub, so a 30-day pay stub, and they're going to check for consistency. I don't know if Mackenzie showed you that one too, but there's a really great way to fake. You can fake pay stubs. Check for consistency. Check to see if the logo, if the font is all consistent. Check if all the deductions have been taken off, and if all the numbers add up. That's the big one, because a lot of these fake ones, the numbers won't add up, and they'll miss deductions like CPP, EI, all that kind of stuff. So you know what a pay stub looks like, and if the font is consistent, you'll be able to see that right off the bat. But do look at them very thoroughly. And then once you have that employer pay stub, that's great. But not everyone has a pay stub. Sometimes you have people who retired early, or they're retirees, or they're trust fund babies and they've never worked because they didn't have to. I'm deeply envious, by the way. And then you can ask for a letter from a bank. Banks sometimes have a form that they'll send you directly that has things checked off, like they've got this X amount of money in this bank account as of this date, and it's been there for however long. So you can see if there's money to actually pay the rent. You can also ask for, if somebody's coming in from overseas, and that's happened a number of times, sometimes they'll ask for a letter from an accredited legislative body like accountants or lawyers, where I want a letter from the accountant stating that this person is, coming in from this country and they work for this company and blah, blah, blah. And then, you might be able to get a fake, but you can look up the lawyer, you can Google them. So yeah,
kind of works out.
I haven't had any problems with that, actually. If they're willing to provide the letter from a bank or from an accountant or a lawyer. Usually if they're willing to jump through the hoops, and we give them a lot of hoops to jump through, they're pretty good.
Oh,
and if they're faking it, yeah, and like you said earlier, if they're lying, you're going to start catching the lies along the way. Or there's going to be something vague or something that's kind of bugging you can't quite put your finger on, and then you'll find it. It'll show up in the screening process.
And we already talked about your number 9 with, getting, it's not the landlord reference, trying to figure out if they are indeed the landlord. But you mentioned in your article with Front Lobby is that it's this 2 landlords, 2 to 3 landlords. Like we want to show, like, can you remember all of your landlords that you have had? And they might, say, oh, I don't have his number, it's been a while, but it's still nice to just even try to ask, because someone who is very organized, this is something that, we can definitely, it's just a nice question to see what type of tenant we're working with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they'll have something. People who don't have a landlord reference would be kids who are moving out of the house for the first time. Kids, they're like 18 to 20. Maybe they lived at home all that time. Sometimes people who've owned a home and maybe they're divorced, or their spouse has passed away and they're downsizing. Sometimes they don't have a landlord reference, but there are other ways you can check. If they've had an employer, if they have neighbors, they've got a realtor, you can ask for all those types of things too. So you think, rather than just that person, if they don't have a landlord reference, think who's in their immediate circle and is a professional contact who's kind of obligated to tell you the truth. So you can ask for references from those sources.
Yeah,
if that makes any sense at all.
Just a question. They can answer, they can comply, or they're just going to run, but it's someone that we need to work with, right? Just like we need to make sure that unit is fit for the type of tenant you're looking for. Now that brings us into number 10.
Do you require parking? Always a good question, especially when
landlords. The parking is so important.
I've had more crazy pants stuff go on with parking than probably anything else. Knock on wood. But yeah, you make an assumption that one person would just have one car, or maybe a couple has one car or 2 cars, but that's not always the case. Sometimes people have multiple cars. They've got a truck, a trailer, a bunch of quads, so you really have to ask them how much parking they need, not just, that one. I guess that's a question I have frequently forgotten to ask, is how much parking do you want? Because then the person will come in and they'll view the property and everything goes fine. And then they say, by the way, I need a place to house my tractor trailer, my truck, my quad, my wife has another truck, and we each have 2 cars, so parking is a pretty important question. You don't want to annoy your neighbors. You don't want to prevent people from being able to park in front of their own houses. So yeah, it's a pretty important question.
And it's you can put parking for one in the ad, but sometimes they don't read. So having that one question when they're trying to book a screen, a viewing for the properties, to letting them know that it's one, there's nowhere else to park, or don't be parking in other people's spots, because then we just got to give you notice again. So it's definitely something where, and it kind of tells of, how many people are planning to live in the place. It's like, oh, it's just the 2 of us, but we got 4 cars. I was like, oh, no,
no. That's come up is where, you have to be very specific about where people park, especially in a suited property. Because in the past, when I had one of my suited properties, I would have the upstairs tenants who paid way more for rent than the downstairs tenants. They had access to the garage. And usually the downstairs tenants didn't have parking, or they didn't have a car, or they had one car. But it doesn't always work that way. So this last year I had the tenants downstairs each had a vehicle, they each had a truck. The people upstairs each had a truck, and the one guy had quads and stuff. So he wanted to store all of his stuff in the garage and park his truck out on the driveway. And the tenants downstairs were really adamant that they should also get to park on the driveway. So it became this big fight between all four of them on a very regular basis. And I just thought, it's up to me to specify. Here's who parks on the driveway. Here's who parks in the garage. Here's who parks on the street. And then say that before they move in. Say that when they're coming in for the showing. Tell them again when they're signing the lease. Tell them again after they've signed the lease.
And while it's in the lease, write it in the lease.
Yes, write it in the lease. And then that way they can't argue with you. You can say, let's go back to the lease. Here it is.
And you're number 11. This is where, it's definitely something to show well-planned type of tenants.
Are you able to pay the security deposit and the first month's rent at the time of your lease signing?
And that's in Ontario, first and last, right? So no security deposits, guys. Sorry, we're in Ontario. She's in Alberta. I know it hurts me every time, but
you call it a damage deposit. You don't call it a security deposit, or you call it first and the last month's rent.
Yeah, first and last, because if there is some type of damage, we can't take it. So it's like, yeah, we can't. We don't do anything like that. No fun stuff. You guys got like one piece of paper, like we're bringing you to the board. There's all your breaches. Like I said, we're killing a tree. Like boom, boom. We got A, B, C, D, E, F forms. Like it's a lot going on here. We're working on trying to educate our elected officials on how to streamline this process, not make it so complicated that you need a university degree just to try to kick someone out for non-payment of rent. And you get to see a lot of our hearings where a lot of minor errors in the paperwork that result into landlords having to reset back again, right? So this goes back into why landlords need to make sure that we're dealing with people who have the full means of being able to pay. And it's okay, especially with a tenant knowing that they're giving 60 days notice, because we require 60 days notice in order for a tenant to vacate. So when you look at having last month's rent in place for other property, and knowing that you're moving within that 60 days, our tenants shouldn't have a problem giving you that down deposit.
No, right. Especially if that's standard practice for you. Well, and it's standard practice across the board. In Alberta, they have basically it's the equivalent of 2 months rent, because you can't have your security deposit be more than your rent. Mm-hmm. So it kind of is first and last month's rent, but we call it a security.
You just can take it to do other things with it.
You can take it for there are a number of reasons, legal reasons we can take it. But do you allow people to pay in installments? Like if they say, I could pay the first month's rent, but no, we don't.
No, I'm telling you, so many of our landlords, getting them on we just let them in. They wanted to move in a little bit early, first and last, it's, you want to move them in a little bit early, so be it. Retroactive, give them a couple of days free. Always get your first and last month's rent. I think a lot of landlords have fall prey to just lies, because they pull on your heartstrings, and a lot of our landlords, they're with their heart, and it's like, we're a business, guys. Put your business suit on. We got to get going.
Yeah. Okay. So no exceptions in your case. I have allowed people to pay their security deposit in installments, and I've never gotten stiffed, but they all had really good credit ratings and proof of employment and everything else. So all the rest of the ducks were in a row. It hasn't happened very often. Normally, and when we had the property management business, we never allowed payments. They had to cough up both at the same time, just because we didn't take any risks whatsoever with our clients. So,
it's too much of a risk, and that it's already a risk coming into the business. And when the rules and the procedures and the process is as another risk, that's why the government's going, what's happening to our supply? I'm like, I don't know, guys. You don't see this?
You have to make it easier for landlords, yes, protect the tenants, but landlords need protection too. I mean, if you're handing the keys of your $500,000 or $1 million property, and a lot of properties are close to $1 million, you need some protection. You can't just give that away for free. There have to be, some provision for support for us.
And as a landlord, I get very educated on different programs that are out there to help tenants, right? So as a landlord, I can bring that knowledge to my tenants to help them if I see them struggling. But we have tenants that are out there who literally know that they can go months before front lobby and landlord credit bureau is in place, where they can, abuse landlord after landlord, go years without paying rent, and we have like Nina Willis, like everyone can, her name has been, plastered as that professional tenant, like I think everyone in Canada knows of a Nina Willis, right? So it's like, okay, we have to make sure that we're able to identify these red flags. We have to make sure that we're doing our checks, and then we got to know we have that education. So it's definitely very important for us to do it, and informing our tenants of our rules, letting them know who we are, what they can expect as us being, that business. And I think landlords, we're not respected enough as businesses. In Ontario, they use landlords as social agencies with no compensation. That's when we see that landlords are, having to take the brunt of, dealing with a delinquent tenant who is just kind of going by and technically frauding landlords after landlords, right? And nothing was getting done until now. There's repercussions. There is that step where you don't have to get that judgment in order to report that debt to the bureaus now, and it does allow them to understand that you can't do it anymore. So getting into your number 12, because obviously talking about our business and letting them know who we are, why would number 12 be important for you?
So 12 is property management, property maintenance inspections. Or property maintenance inspection reports is probably the formal term. And you don't have to call it that. You could call them or maintenance checks. And I always let people know, even when they call in for a screening, during the pre-screening, I let them know that I do property maintenance inspections several times a year. And you have to figure out how often your property insurance wants you to do that. Some will say twice, some will say 3 times, some will say 4 times, some don't care. Either way, make sure you're doing them at least twice a year for new tenants. And I let them know that it's for their benefit, because if there's something that isn't working or something that, I can help them with, or if they're having problems with the neighbors or whatever, I'm there to help them. I'm there to support them and to make sure they're living in a really good quality property that's in good repair. And then when you go, bring your property maintenance inspection checklist with you and go through the property, and it's your chance to kind of have a nice friendly chat with them and see how things are going and if things are working. And that's, usually when things come up. Are there any issues? Yes. And then they can tell you stuff like, oh yeah, the washer door doesn't close properly, or the dryer makes this funny smell every time I turn it on. The bathroom fan doesn't work. I mean, those are things you need to know. And sometimes tenants just forget to tell you. Yeah. They're kind of living with it for a while and they're busy and they forget. So it's your way to make sure that your property stays in good repair. And also in terms of your insurance, if you are not keeping your property in good repair, insurance can penalize you for that. So if something turns into a big problem, like let's say you've got a leaking faucet in your kitchen sink and it drips behind the wall and turns into a black mold problem, if you didn't make an attempt to fix it, insurance can say you are not keeping your property in good repair, and we're not going to pay for any kind of recompense for that. So it's important for landlords to do a property maintenance inspection check for many things. I mean, one, to help out the tenants. Secondly, to make sure that everything works. Thirdly, to pacify your insurance provider. And fourthly, make sure there's no illegal activity going on there. Other people have moved in. Are there any other pets there? You could even check.
Just put a hole in my wall.
Yeah. Those are things you want to check for. And check the garage, check the backyard, check everything. If you've got an attic, go up and check the attic, And good people won't mind. They'll actually look forward to your visits because they can have a good chin wag with you, and they've got gossip to tell you, and it's kind of fun. Bad tenants can put up a fuss, but you can catch them. So that you can catch it early if you do a property maintenance inspection. So that's why you should always do them. And always tell people you're going to do them and write it into your lease. I've got it in my lease that I do property maintenance inspection checks on a regular basis.
That's it. Like when you're talking, I'm like, I'm getting goosebumps. I'm like, one, you're telling them right up front. You're telling them right up front that you're doing these inspections. It really encourages them to take care of the place, keep it clean, because they know that these inspections are happening. Right away, you're going to be doing them at least twice a year because of that smoke detector situation and the carbon monoxide detectors, making sure you're checking them, because anything goes wrong, you need to show that you've been in there, you're doing those type of checks as well, right? So it's really important that they have it. And then starting to deal with the issue right away. When you start to see a growing pattern of that first initial check, you know that you need to continue, and you need to know what that process is if the situation is getting type of worse. And deep down, as landlords, if there is a type of maintenance issue that you're not addressing or you just don't know of, and now let's say that you want to bring your tenant to the landlord and tenant board over, non-payment of rent, they can come back and put their application in forth to say that they weren't paying rent because of a maintenance issue that they never even told you about. And now you got to try to address that maintenance issue before your hearing date, to show the adjudicator that you are being a good landlord and you're doing your duties and holding up your responsibility as a landlord, right? So maintenance is definitely important, especially for the smoke detectors, guys. It's spring ahead, fall back. These are the types of getting your properties prepared, and just always making sure that your tenants are knowing that you're around and you're not going to be those landlords. And if you don't hear of any maintenance issues,
it doesn't mean
do your notice. When you don't hear from them, that's another whoa, we haven't heard you from something's got to be leaking, like a light bulb's got to be out, like what's going on there. So always just let them know what to expect, so that they don't feel like you're trying to invade their privacy. And I think that's why some landlords don't, but you just say, I'm just doing it for insurance purposes, for safety. It's just going to be in and out, checking off, we're good to go.
And you don't have to do it yourself. If tenants get kind of creeped out by you going through the property, you could always hire somebody to do your property maintenance inspection report for you.
You can hire a creeper.
You can hire a creeper, yeah. I still have a property in Fort McMurray. I don't live there, so I have people who I hire to do the property maintenance inspection reports, and they take pictures of anything that's broken or different than when they did the move-in inspection report, because they do my move-in inspection reports for me too. So that way you can keep track and you can store it. So.
And that's pictures, pictures before, pictures after. Obviously, you got to watch out taking pictures of tenants' belongings, getting their consent once they're in there, especially with our new rule here in Ontario. So just being cautious on that and posting it. But you see damage, obviously, you're taking pictures of the damage. But just be very, very understanding that is the tenant's home, right? So we want to be very, don't be very picky, nicky. Obviously, it's lived in. You're going to expect that wear and tear. So don't get very huffy and puffy just because you see a bit of garbage and whatnot. Obviously, you got to look at the deep part of, is there a bigger issue here that we need to be looking at?
Does everything function? Are there leaks in the toilet, sinks? Is the furnace running? Is the air conditioner running? All those good things. Smoke detectors are huge. That's a huge
piece of paper, guys. Making sure that you got that clause in there, and if you get the witness to sign off, get the tenants to sign off, and putting the smoke detector in, putting the battery in, it's working in good order. Don't tamper with it, right? Because then, hey, if they're going to play with it, maybe they're going to be caught doing something of, a safety issue with other tenants within the property as well.
Yeah. Now I had a tenant who I had some issues with a company that had worked with a property of mine, and then I went back, took it over, and went through the property and read up a deficiency list. Every single one of the smoke detectors had been pulled open and all the batteries were out. All of
wow.
the entire house.
Oh my God. So now that once you had yourself in a tenant situation where they're cooking and they take down that smoke detector because they were cooking, but they don't put it back up again. And let's say that there was a fire and you haven't recently checked it. How is that going to work with your type of protection, for you and your liability?
Yeah, well, that's a bad one. They are responsible. Like if you've gone in for regular property maintenance inspection reports and you've checked the smoke detectors and everyone signed off that they were fine, you can't monitor every single day of what the tenant does. So if you've checked it, you've been as thorough as you can, you've done your due diligence. If they, after you leave, take the battery out of the smoke detector down and there's a fire, you shouldn't be liable. And I say shouldn't because anybody can sue anybody for anything, and insurance is always trying to get out of paying you. So sorry, it's my cynical nature at this age in my life. But if you've done your due diligence, you should be safe. You should be.
It's always important getting in there, doing the inspections, showing your track record, showing that you do it every single year. Now, before we wrap up here, we got to. Sorry,
I was just going to say the tenant should have insurance as well, so that if there was damage that was caused, then your insurance should be able to go after their insurance.
That was my next question for you from tenant insurance. I don't think we were really looking at tenant insurance as big as we were until it became a part of our standard lease, signing off that you require tenant insurance. Obviously, when there's a situation, if there was a fire, if there was, the concept of water that's coming in and tenants need to be relocated, we always say, like, do you have tenant insurance? Right. It's a way for them to kind of hold their responsibility, and knowing that you have a tenant, asking tenants, do they have tenant insurance at the pre-screening, we're going to know that these are type of tenants that are responsible, that they are having their tenant insurance. They have that copy for you, part of their package. And it's a great way for, us to know what type of tenants that we're dealing with, and know that we do have their type of tenant insurance with the landlord's insurance to work together as a team.
It's protection for them as well, because you never know. You always think something isn't going to happen to you until it happens to you, which is kind of the kind of landlord I was when I first started. But also with tenants, they think, well, there's not going to be any fires or floods or earthquakes or anything. Well, Fort McMurray had 2 floods and 1 fire. My tenants were evacuated from my property twice in 2 years.
Wow.
Because of the floods and the fires. They cleared everyone out of the town. They cleared everyone out of my neighborhood. And the tenants who had insurance were safe. They were fine. The tenants who didn't have insurance were really scrambling. They were having a really tough time. One of them was a hairdresser, and they had to move her to BC. They wanted her to keep working. And she had already spent her money on rent. So I was scrambling, trying to figure out how to help her in some way. I had another guy who just came new into the city. He didn't have tenants insurance. He didn't have a place to live. I was scrambling, calling people, trying to see where I could put it so that he would have a place to stay, because he was just new in town. If there was any place for him to stay. And, you don't need to go through that when you're already in crisis.
No.
It's much better if you're covered and you can't live in the property, and or your things have been destroyed with a fire or flood, and insurance can cover those things, and you're back on your feet again fairly quickly. So I always tell the tenants it's mostly for their protection.
Yeah. And you know what? Same thing here. We had a fire, and the landlord was doing everything in his power to help relocate those type of tenants as well, right? So if you had some insurance, at least you can know that potentially that short-term accommodation could have been a great way to keep housing them, especially since it was in the middle of winter. So it does really protect the landlord, and it does protect the tenants. And we're going to get a little bit into another video about tenant insurance, because there's so much more benefits as well to the landlords, requiring your tenants to get some tenant insurance. But now that you're number 14, when you're asking them number 14, what would that be?
Do you have any questions or concerns? So this gives them the opportunity to bring anything up that maybe they don't understand, or that maybe you haven't mentioned that's important to them, or if there's something that they weren't quite clear about, then it gives them an opportunity to have a discussion with you about it.
And that's the part. You want to make sure that they're open to it. You're asking, they'll probably ask you, do you do a credit check? Perfect time for that opportunity by asking that type of question. And they obviously going to know what is expected of them as they are booking in to come and see the unit. And then you're getting your character feel of this type of person, and go, can we work together? Can we work out? And this is a great way to keep going. And there's lots of other tenant screening tips that we're not going to bring it up. We can't bring it everywhere.
But what I find with asking these questions, you either have people that are willing to answer them and they're polite and respectful, and that's great, because that's what you want. You're good. If this is a long-term relationship, you want people that are going to be polite and respectful towards you. Or they might start kicking up a big fuss. Well, I don't know why I have to run a credit report. I'm a doctor. I'm this. I'm that. My husband's a lawyer. If they start putting up a big smoke screen, but why they are so special they shouldn't have to do any of these things, then I say, well, thank you very much. That's I appreciate your feedback. However, this is my process, and or it's the company process, and we're not allowed to deviate from it. And so I wish you well and all the best with your search. So let them move along, because there's a reason why they don't want to follow the process. So yeah, it's a good chance for you to get a feel for them. They can get a feel for you. You can see if there's something major that you haven't covered that you're like, oh yeah, you know what, I'm glad they asked that. I'm going to put that in my pre-screening questions.
And
So
if everyone's like tuning in live, and thank you for watching. And if you are, watching as a rerun, still put your comments, put your tips inside of this video, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as this link is in the group chat in this chat right now with the video of where you can find Nelda's article on frontlobby.com, so that you're able to use this as a tool to really educate yourself to avoid these type of problems that we currently could avoid just by getting that education and learning from people who've been in the business. How long, Nelda?
18 years.
18 as well. Wow.
And I
I was
love
like,
talking to other landlords. I just, you end up thinking you're going to have a 5-minute conversation with an experienced landlord. You end up talking for 2 hours because you don't want to share tips. So we'll love to hear your tips. Mackenzie had some excellent tips last time. I talked to him about screening, and you get some really fantastic tips from landlords. So please share them. We'd love to hear them.
Sometimes we get burned and then we learn, right? And everyone in this industry, and I've been, when I talk about being a landlord at the age of 18 and I'm like 36, like how many years have I been doing this? And starting off young, right? Starting off really young, didn't even know that there was a residential and tenants act. Didn't know how municipal and provincial government is very heavily involved into our industry, and why we need to be very much paying attention to what the government is doing all the times, multiple different levels. I'm going to be speaking as a delegate, hopefully, if I can get my paperwork in, on the 22nd on secondary suites. They're going to be doing secondary suites here in Cambridge. So we want to be a delegate. We want to tell them, okay, great, we're loving that you're doing this, but let's take this into consideration if you are doing it, such as parking. They won't allow it for, if you don't have enough room for parking. So being very heavily involved with what your municipalities are doing, and getting on any type of subcommittee. I sit on the Affordable Housing and Homelessness subcommittee in the city of Cambridge to get that voice to say, okay, this is what we need to do as taxpayers. We need to be concerned about what's happening in this industry regarding the housing crisis. So we need to give that voice, bring them different speakers, tell them if they think tiny homes are going to be something that's good, let's talk about tiny homes. Like, how big are these homes? What's the rent going to be? Is it going to be long-term, short-term? Do we have people who are living in homes, big homes, and they're going to create those tiny homes just to downsize to rent their homes? We want to kind of bring this education to our elected officials at the same time, knowing that I've been doing it for many, many years. And I got into property management just over 2 years ago. I joined, we did Boardwalk Property Management, and I don't know if most of you I never really made an announcement, but we literally closed as of April 1st. We're going to be closing Boardwalk Property Management because I found that through Boardwalk Property Management and managing these fantastic landlords' accounts, we have a lot of landlords that are very hands-on. They just are very scared. They don't have that education. They don't know the process. They don't know how to talk to their tenants. And it came down to me going, okay, like, why am I doing the management? You could do it. We just need to educate you a little bit more. So one of two endeavors that I'm going to be exploring as of May 1st is landlord consulting, one-on-one with landlords. So this is a way for me to very much help our landlords when they need me. Not so much where I can do it all the time and get paid. And yes, the money was great doing it, but let's help our landlords when they need you. And this is a great way for me to offer this type of service to the community in Ontario, to give them my years of experience, try to navigate ways for them to deal with the problem themselves before they have to go to the landlord and tenant board, or help them get educated so that they don't have an issue, and giving them more input and information regarding tenant screening one-on-one, and helping them pick tenants together, through a Zoom or a phone call. There's lots of opportunities for consultations that I'm going to be offering to our members underneath landlord consulting.
That's
and
great.
then the other thing, which I'm so excited for. So as you know, with Ontario Landlords Watch, we have always been that support. We've been that advocacy. We've always wanted to make sure that we're bringing landlords the perfect products, the services that are available to us to better manage our business, to better help us grow our portfolio. And that's why I became the ambassador to Front Lobby and Landlord Credit Bureau, so that I was able to bring awareness to rent reporting, bringing awareness to very detailed credit reports. Now I have now taken on the position as of today as the ambassador to Tenant Cube. And this is a beautiful platform. I've been researching platforms for over 2 years because it was the missing piece of what Ontario Landlords Watch wanted to make sure we were bringing to our community. And for this program to be offered to our landlords with 3 units or less for free. And then if you do have more than 3 units, it's $1 per door. And what you're able to get through the marketing, the rental application process, the automatic rent collections, the rent reminders, the expense tracking, the lease onboarding. You know, how many landlords do we have that just are just fumbling with how to download that stupid little lease that we have to get from the government? It gives you such a runaround if you do not have that Adobe. So this is now worked in there. Your work orders. So all your tenants who are complaining about a maintenance issue, keeping that as a diary for yourself when you are dealing with a tenant. This is going to be very crucial. If you ever have to go to the landlord and tenant board. So keeping that work order that is going to be there, and that tenant communication is very important, to have a very detailed communication between your tenants, so that if they say something, you say something, it's going to the landlord and tenant board. Let's keep track of that conversation so you can bring that as evidence, and making sure that all your repairs and your maintenance, and being able to send that maintenance request out right away to your contractor through this platform in itself. So there is more features that this company is going to be offering our landlords, and I'm proud to be a part of this program as Tenant Cube, so that I can take what you're telling me as landlords in our community of what you want, what you need, and I want to bring that voice not only to Front Lobby and Landlord Credit Bureau, but I'm bringing that voice now to Tenant Cube to make sure that we have everything, because advocacy, it is slow. We have to understand they're playing very political game in the housing industry, and we are trying, because you got to see, we have our elected officials that are struggling to have their voices heard being elected official. So you can only imagine what it's like for someone without an elected official title trying to advocate for not only the good landlords, the good tenants, but also taxpayers. But we have to keep going. Don't let it just discourage you. You just, as I do different type of meetings and meetups with different landlord groups, I'm there to try to get myself creating more advocates, teaching them how to be good advocates. So this is something that I continue to do, and I will continue to do, as well as on an interview process on CTV on Tuesday, going to talk about the delays at the landlord and tenant board on Tuesday with Pat Foran. So I'm excited to bring that interview for you, and to make sure that I'm representing the community of our members as well as I possibly can, giving them the information that we need in order to be that community where we are going to be the solution to the affordable housing crisis. We just have to do a little bit more, because as taxpayers, you see our government now spending millions, putting them into projects. And it's great that you're able to get a few units on the go, but why don't you just work with landlords? Work with the landlords, not working against them.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited. I'll definitely make sure that everyone has an option to get into Tenant Cube. I'm putting that in our chat right now, so everyone can join on board there. And then for anyone who's wanting to get a part of Front Lobby, our members, they do get a discount of 15% off. So give it a try. It's not it's very easy to use. Don't be scared on what to do. It's an easy transition for your current tenants as well as your potential tenants. So being able to put that information out there to help your tenants, grow, and also just know that there is repercussions for not being able to pay your rent on time. And I will be bringing different products of programs from our governments that is available to our tenants, to your knowledge as the landlords, so that we can bring that help to our tenants as well. Nelda, I can't thank you enough. We're at our time for the hour and 15 minutes that I put in. I'm very proud of myself to say that we got, I didn't run over, and I'm glad that everyone is able to tune in and learn. And if we are having comments on the Facebook page that I may not be able to see because you're not in the StreamYard link, which I'm working on that, I will make sure that we join and interact with you as soon as we're done the live broadcast. And if anyone has any questions about Landlord Credit Bureau, Front Lobby, and Tenant Cube, or landlord consulting, please reach out to me through Facebook, or you can email me at olwlandlords@gmail.com. I want to thank you, Nelda, for being a fantastic guest. And I'm sure we have lots of more that I'm going to be bringing you back on, because you're not done yet, hon. I know you're not, because
you can run, but you can't hide.
Well, I love the fact that everyone was guessing what I was going to be announcing today. So a lot of people thought it was an elected official. I was going to be the head of Landlord Tenant Board, or that they thought I was pregnant with baby number 5.
Oh,
and I'm
boy.
like, huh. you got a better chance of me running for the leadership for the Conservatives if that was the case.
I'd rather run for politics than have another baby.
I'd rather run, guys.
Thank you very much for having me, and I really love your message about landlords making sure they've got a seat at the table with the elected officials, because they need to know what we're going through. And
stay connected to each other, be supportive to one another, realize we got newbies, we have experienced landlords, we have a lot of those questions that come up that we should know the answer to, but we don't. Just please be very kind to one another in the group. We want to be very special. If you do have someone who's waiting to get into the group and they are your friends, please give me a message, just because we are very heavily screening our members that before they come in. That's why we have about 2,900 members, trying to get into the group. But we're very protective, because we're very supportive of one another, and we're looking at the bigger picture. It's not just we got good landlords, good tenants, and taxpayers. I want to do everything that I can to bring solutions to the table to our elected officials, and I can only do it with the members that are in my group. So I really want to thank everyone for commenting and sharing their posts, their comments, their questions, and their news articles. It really makes a difference for the community.
Great stuff. Anyway, I love what you're doing. Kudos to you, and thank you for all the work you're doing with helping Canadian landlords, and especially Ontario landlords. So thanks so much, Kayla, and thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you so much, Nelda. We'll have Nelda's information in the group in the video, so that if you want to reach out to Nelda, definitely talk to her. She's available. She's fantastic, and I can't wait to share her book.
Thanks so much, Kayla. Have a good
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.